Born 72 years before the Battle of Yavin, Mace Windu was one of the most legendary masters to ever grace the ranks of the Jedi Order. Born on the jungle world of Harun Kal, Windu was taken into Jedi Order at an extremely young age at the urging of local Jedi anthropologists who wished for the local tribe of Karuni to attempt to reconnect with the Force. Prodigiously talented in the Force, Windu passed the trials early and continued to progress through the ranks of the Order by achieving the title of Jedi Master at the remarkably young age of 28. He was appointed to the Jedi Council not long after, where he would gain a lifetime seat. Windu served the Jedi Order his entire life, training several Jedi, including Deepa Billaba, Echu Shenjon, and likely Ram Koda. It was Master Windu who led 212 Jedi into combat at the Battle of Geonosis, and slew the infamous bounty hunter Jango Fett. He continued to serve the Republic throughout the Clone Wars, often on the front lines of fierce fighting where he led Republic forces as one of 10 Jedi High Generals. He would distinguish himself across the battlefronts of Dantooine, Ryloth, Null, Boz Pity, and Harun Kal, amongst many others. In the final days of the war, Windu confronted and cornered Darth Sidious, who was revealed by Anakin Skywalker to be Republic's Supreme Chancellor Palpatine. He was ultimately betrayed by Skywalker and subsequently killed by Sidious, falling to his death from the windows of Sidious's office. Born to Han and Leia Organa Solo on Coruscant, Jaina Solo, along with her twin brother Jason, inherited her father's mechanical aptitude and her mother's force sensitivity, resulting in her eventual training at the Jedi Praxium on Yavin 4. When the Yuuzhan Vong invaded the galaxy, Solo joined the New Republic military and distinguished herself as a rogue squadron pilot. She was constantly on the front lines of battle during the Yuuzhan Vong War, earning the title of Sword of the Jedi from her uncle, Luke Skywalker, along with the rank of Jedi Knight, and even becoming known as an avatar of the trickster goddess Yun Harla to the Yuuzhan Vong. During the war, the death of her brother Anakin caused Solo to walk dangerously close to the dark side, though would stay her course through the light. As the war waged on, Jaina personally slew War Master Sevong La in the Battle of Ebok 9. As a survivor of the mission to Myker, Jaina later became joined into the Killik community and was involved in the subsequent Dark Nest crisis and the Swarm War on the side of the Killiks against the Chiss. In 40 ABY, when her twin brother Jason Solo fell to the dark side and became the Sith Lord known as Darth Caedus and plunged the galaxy into war once more, Jaina swallowed her pride and apprenticed herself under the legendary bounty hunter Boba Fett as a means of acquiring new skills to assassinate Caedus. During a climactic final battle, Jaina would duel her brother in the belly of a Star Destroyer named for their late brother Anakin Solo, resulting in Caedus' death and the end of the Second Galactic Civil War. Following her brother's death, Solo remained an active member of the Order. Jaina joined her uncle in fighting a secret war against both an emerging Sith threat and a dark side entity known as Abeloth, and racked up numerous Sith kills during the course of the conflict. When the Sith and Abeloth took control of the government on Coruscant, Solo joined her uncle and many of the other Jedi in an infiltration and surprise assault on the occupiers. During the Battle of the Jedi Temple, where Jaina, Corran Horn, and Luke Skywalker held their own against wave after wave of 5,000 Sith along with Abeloth herself, Jaina would be elevated to the rank of Jedi Master and appointed to the Jedi High Council for her incredible actions and bravery. Following the destruction of Abeloth and the end of the Sith threat, Jaina Solo married the Imperial Jagged Fel, whom she had reconnected with during the Second Galactic Civil War, and while her ultimate fate remains unknown, her descendants would rule the remnants of the Empire as a new royal family. Hello YouTube, this is the Phoenix Exalt bringing you the next installment of my Versus series. For this analysis, I will be using Mace Windu during the time frame of Revenge of the Sith, and Jaina Solo from the time frame of Fate of the Jedi. I will be pulling from Legends continuity along with any canon materials that do not directly interfere with previously made Legends materials. Due to the fact that the Disney Story Group is going in a direction that is neither original nor creative, I will not be using canon as the main point of Star Wars media for my videos. As for the 2008 show Star Wars The Clone Wars, I will be using the episodes, arcs, and tie-in materials for Windu that do not contradict or diminish his feats elsewhere in the Star Wars lore. As always, I own none of the characters, art, music, or other media depicted in this video, and all rights to them go to the respective companies. With that out of the way, I present to you Mace Windu versus Jaina Solo. If these two legendary Jedi met on the battlefield, who would be the victor? Mace Windu was a 53-year-old Kurenai male who stood at 6'3" with a strong athletic build. The Kurenai species were an offshoot of the human race, sharing the exact same genetic makeup as humans, possessing highly evolved brains, advanced hardiness, and adaptability to sudden changes in environment, with the notable distinction that every single member of the Kurenai species was force sensitive, to at least some extent. Mace was an incredibly tough fighter. During his mission to Harun Kal, he would survive the jungle onslaught of both wildlife and enemy combatants, before being pummeled repeatedly by Carvaster and his war dogs. Then, during his final confrontation with Carvaster and Deepa Bilaba, Windu would power through being stabbed in the gut with a lightsaber, and keep fighting. Windu's greatest attribute was his speed, being able to land 6 punches on Carvaster before the man could so much as blink, and during his fight with Palpatine, Windu was described as moving so fast that he was blurring in and out of existence. Though, for that particular feat, I do lend that more to the force boosting effect of Apad rather than a natural ability, as despite this level of speed, he was unable to prevent the deaths of Saisi Tin and Agen Kolar that resulted from Palpatine's surprise speed attack. As for strength, Mace has been showing tearing apart B-2 super battle droids barehanded, though this was more than likely with force assistance. Additionally, it can be seen during Windu's multiple appearances that he was not out of his element during long battlefield campaigns. In short, he was not to be taken lightly. Jaina Solo was a 34-year-old human female who stood at just under 4'9" and was still in her physical prime. In terms of fitness and agility, little sets her apart from any other trained Jedi. However, Jaina's physical endurance was astounding, her best showings being her 2 duels against Darth Caedus and the battle for the Jedi Temple. During her first duel with Caedus, Jaina would receive a severe concussion along with multiple shrapnel wounds and other injuries, but would still be well enough to attempt to continue the fight along with being able to escape, though only just. During her second duel with her brother, she would suffer a stabbing lightsaber wound to the abdomen, a mix of first and second and third degree burns from an impact with an incinerator, a broken ankle, a broken wrist, along with multiple lacerations and other physical blows. Jaina would survive all of these in rapid succession and kill her brother, and would remain conscious long enough to both be rescued and ensure the survival of her comrades. The battle for the Jedi Temple was likely her most impressive display of physical resilience. For 2 days, Jaina, Corran Horn, and Luke Skywalker battled against wave after wave of the 5,000 Sith within the Jedi Temple, along with the Force entity known as Abeloth. Keep in mind that Abeloth was so powerful that it took the combined mights of both the most powerful Jedi in galactic history, Luke Skywalker, and the second most powerful Sith Lord in history, Darth Krayt, to kill her a few days after the battle. During the start of the battle, Solo would receive a leg wound from a grenade blast, multiple blaster shots to her body, one of which hampered her breathing. Over the course of the next 2 days, Jaina would receive a broken arm, multiple broken ribs, along with an unknown amount of other minor injuries. During the last stage of the battle that Jaina would participate in, she was also suffering from Force euphoria, a condition that resulted from drawing on the Force incredibly heavily for prolonged periods of time. Luke Skywalker noted that Jaina had been drawing on the Force so heavily for so long that her cells were practically glowing with Force energy, and gave her only a few minutes before she experienced a crash every bit as severe as a drug user coming down from an overdose. Jaina would survive all of this, and just a short while later would be healed enough to rush back into combat against Abeloth for the final confrontation of the now not-so-secret war. This conclusion is rather simple to call, but I will of course give an explanation of my decision. To begin with, one might think that Jaina should get the edge given that she has 2 decades of youth on Windu, along with a lifestyle of near constant combat as she has personally fought in most of the major battles of the previous 4 wars, one of which was against opposing Force wielders, and another against the Force-immune Yuuzhan Vong. However, despite this, when you compare the two together, I do not believe that there is much debate in a purely physical contest. Windu is roughly 1.5 feet taller, with more strength and speed on his side than Jaina. Additionally, Mace has proven that he has at the very least a comparable degree of durability to Jaina, along with slightly similar reflexes. I will grant that Jaina likely has the agility edge due to her smaller stature, and definitely has the edge of endurance, due to her youth and previous showings, as Mace has never been shown having feats similar to Jaina in this regard. However, at the end of the day, in a hand-to-hand fight, I do not see how Jaina would be able to overcome Windu, and as such, Jedi Master Mace Windu gets the edge in physical abilities. Trained as a Jedi Guardian, Windu was considered to be one of the best swordsmen in the history of the Jedi Order, mastering all 7 classical forms of lightsaber combat, and would even create his own lightsaber form that was a branch of Form 7, Juyo. This style would be named Vapad, after the creature with the same name, that was a native to the world of Serapin and its moons. Vapad would be created by Mace, along with fellow Jedi Sora Bulk, after Windu's elevation to mastery, but before the start of the Clone Wars. The Vapad creature was incredibly deadly, possessing multiple tentacles that would strike so wildly and quickly that they would be a blur to the naked eye. Therefore, it was impossible to tell how many the creature had before its death. Windu would apply the same strategy to the creation of the martial arts aspect of Vapad. A Vapad's user's attacks would flow into each other with liquid precision, creating the constant, near-invisible weave of energy, which was the ready stance of Vapad. It was also possible to apply Vapad in unarmed combat, with the user's arms becoming too fast to see, as well as in the use of dual lightsabers, as showcased by Windu on Harun Kal. While observing the duel between Darth Sidious and Mace Windu, Anakin Skywalker considers Windu's Vapad bladework to be an oblate sphere of purple fire, to quote directly, which contained dozens of blades attacking from every angle. However, Vapad was described as a more than fighting style. It was a state of mind that led right to the edge of the line between light and dark, requiring the user to enjoy the fight and relish in the satisfaction of winning. The practitioner of Vapad would accept the fury of their opponent, transforming themselves into one half of a superconducting loop, with the other half being the power of darkness inherent in the opponent. This superconducting loop allowed a practitioner of Vapad that was sufficiently skilled to compensate for a weaker force power by bolstering their own force powers with that of their opponent. Notably, this does not mean that any practitioner of Vapad can defeat any dark side force user. All the form does is help bridge a gap in force potential. If Quinlan Vos or Deepa Billaba had faced down Palpatine, they would have been destroyed by the Sith Lord. However, Mace was skilled enough with the blade to hold off Palpatine's assault and form the superconducting loop that would allow for Mace's force potential to temporarily increase to equal that of Palpatine's. This loop was also incredibly dangerous to the user. both in a physical sense and a mental sense. On the physical side, Vapad required a constant and sizable stream of force use from the user, with a barely contained explosion of force power essential to all variations of Form 7 as another prerequisite for its use. This effect was best described by fellow YouTuber Ready4, when he was discussing what a matchup between Mace and Palpatine without Anakin's intervention would have looked like. In his words, the question was not if Mace would win, but rather, would he survive the explosion of force energy that would inevitably occur as the force power flowing through the two became supercharged in overtime. On a more mental front, the forum was also mentioned with a cautionary warning by the Jedi that the use of Vapad led the user perilously close to the dark side due to its focus on physical combat. This is due to the fact that creating superconducting loop required taking in the darkness from the opponents into oneself without letting it touch nor corrupt the soul before sending it back out. This had to be done with both speed and precision, and a mistake would likely result in one of the following: a failure of the loop, an explosion of force energy, or falling to the dark side. You pick which is worse. And for what it's worth, it should be noted that Mace Windu is the only practitioner of Vapad to never fall to the dark side, as even though Deepa Billaba and Quinlan Vos came back, they still fell. As for how the loop worked in practice, it was only ever successfully deployed once in combat, against the most powerful Sith Lord in galactic history. In order to combat Palpatine, Windu gave himself over completely to Vapad. He allowed it to fully channel his own inner darkness, as well as accepting and using the darkness of Sidious. When fully immersed in his form, Windu's fighting prowess was such that he could allow his body to fight automatically for him, without needing to direct it with his mind. Sidious's own fury was used and redirected by Windu via the use of Vapad, a process which Windu mentally likened to a lightsaber deflecting a blaster bolt back at its source. Other than his fight against Palpatine, Windu has fought and bested the infamous Jedi killer General Grievous, Carvaster, Deepa Billaba, Sorpulk, Asajj Ventress, and in terms of implied feats, at the start of the Clone Wars it was believed that other than Yoda, Windu was the only Jedi capable of beating Count Dooku in a straight lightsaber duel, and when they met in combat, Dooku was forced to rely on his Magna Guards in order to escape the confrontation with Windu. All in all, Mace Windu was as deadly as a combatant that a Jedi could become. As an early member of the new Jedi Order, Jaina was likely trained first in the 3 Rings of Defense. Essentially a hybrid of the strong, medium, and fast styles, the 3 Rings of Defense was a simplistic form of combat designed to introduce the students of Luke's Academy to the principles of lightsaber combat. The main difference being that it functioned as one fluid form rather than 3 separate styles. As described by Corran Horn, the style consisted of 3 sets of unique stances and maneuvers that dealt with dueling at various ranges. The outer ring consists of grand sweeping power attacks, the middle ring consisting of short, sharp strikes designed to redirect projectiles, and the inner ring using tight conservative blocks aimed at shunting aside power attacks and parrying a probing offensive. The 3 rings were a tutorial style used by the new Jedi Order, and after their training and it was complete, students were tasked with personalizing their style in whatever way they saw fit. However, by the time of Jaina's mastery, the new Jedi Order had long since rediscovered the classical forms of lightsaber combat, and even the more obscure ancient forms. Corran Horn trained in Kratata, Kyle Katarn and Luke Skywalker mastered all 7, and the newer students would be allowed to study a classical form if they chose to do so. The specifics of Jaina's skill set are not confirmed in any source, though, based on a description of her fighting style, an educated guess can be made. While dueling her brother for the first time, he described her fighting style as conservative, brutal, ruthless, designed to deal damage without suffering any in return, not at all tricky, and like nothing that Caedus had ever seen before. Nor was it taught at the Praxium on Yavin 4. During Jaina's opening moves in the Battle for the Jedi Temple, she would describe herself as chaos, letting the battle flow through her and allowing her to fully lose herself to the fight. Additionally, it can be seen that Jaina fully integrates both force and physical combat into her lightsaber sequences. The conclusion I have reached is that Jaina was a master of Form 7 Juyo. Juyo was described as the most vicious form of lightsaber combat and was said to be filled with both fury and malignant grace. Appropriately labeled the ferocity form, the style was both chaotic and erratic, with a heavy focus on offense. As the most aggressive form of lightsaber combat, the standard prerequisite to Juyo is mastery of two other forms of classical lightsaber combat. This results in no two applications of Juyo being the same, as every practitioner is going in with completely different skill sets and backgrounds. I believe that the two other forms that Jaina mastered were Form 1, Shicho, and Form 4, Ataru, a form of combat that predated lightsabers themselves. Form 1, Shicho lightsaber combat was wild and raw, relying on deliberate tactics and being primarily aimed towards losing yourself in the currents of the Force into the hands of a master. Shicho was fluid, but highly randomized and unpredictable. Shicho was specialized towards engaging multiple opponents, the wide sweeping motions being ideally suited towards attacking numerous adversaries. However, Form 1 was not as useful against single opponents, as the wide motions became clumsy in single combat. I believe Jaina compensated for this with a study of Ataru. Form 4 was the most acrobatic and physically demanding of all the classical forms of lightsaber combat. Categorized by both wild flourishes and acrobatics along with the fluid integration of physical combat into lightsaber sequences, Jaina has been shown employing force-assisted acrobatics on numerous occasions, along with heavily utilizing the integration of physical combat techniques along with alternative weapon sets into her lightsaber sequences. While usually a practitioner of Form 7 is considered strong in a saber duel but weak to force attacks, Jaina seems to have partially transcended this weakness. When Darth Caedus attempted to use the Force to turn her head around on her shoulders, she used her acrobatic skill to turn the motion into a spinning kick, bringing her body around with her head. Additionally, Jaina enhanced her lightsaber technique with Mandalorian physical combat techniques learned from the likes of Boba Fett and Goran Bevan, along with Vatok Trao. These fed into her style, allowed her to achieve the proper mindset to both thoroughly lose herself to the fight, while keeping her head, allowing her to make sound tactical decisions in the midst of a chaotic battlefield, and killing cold. As for Jaina's feats, she personally slew Yuuzhan Vong War Master Sevong La in single combat, defeated Darth Caedus in both of their duels, killing the Sith Lord in the latter duel, killed numerous members of the Lost Tribe of the Sith over the course of the Secret War, and notably killing 3 dark-side-boosted elite Sith sabers on Dromund Kaas without suffering a single injury, along with her multiple Sith kills during the previously mentioned Battle for the Jedi Temple. While Jaina may not look particularly imposing, she was certainly not a combatant to be messed with. This verdict is difficult to call. While it is true that Windu has mastered more styles than Jaina, it is also true that he has never been depicted utilizing anything other than Vapad in a lightsaber duel. Mentioning Vapad, one might think that because Mace Windu is the only person in galactic history to ever fully master Vapad, that he would have the edge over Jaina, as she could not have seen his style before. However, I find this unlikely, and before anyone writes a paragraph comment, let me explain. First and foremost, Jaina's ability to cope with both Darth Caedus and the Lost Tribe of the Sith members proves that she is capable of dealing with combatants with radically different fighting styles that she could not have encountered before. Caedus having incorporating the teachings of multiple arcane force-using sects into his fighting style, such as the AT, and the Lost Tribe of the Sith practicing lightsaber styles from the era of Naga Sadow, some 5,000 years prior. But, disregarding that for a moment, it has been explicitly stated that records of Vapad did in fact make it into the hands of the new Jedi Order, and while it does not appear that any current member chose to master it, it is highly unlikely that any serious study of Form 7 would not include at least a cursory investigation of Vapad. Simply put, any study of one aspect of the form would include the other. Considering the fact that it has also been confirmed that students of Jaina's generation were able to study the classical styles as part of their training, and some did, I find it unlikely that she wouldn't have a basic understanding of how the style functioned, considering how combat-oriented Jaina was. To Windu's credit, there is nothing in Jaina's arsenal that he has not seen before to some extent. While it is true that Jaina's specific application of Form 7 would be as unique as every other application, I find it doubtful that Windu would be unable to cope, as he has fought other Form 7 users such as Darth Sidious, Deepa Billaba, Sora Bulk, and even General Grievous, who is able to copy Vapad to some extent. Next we move on to experience. In their prime, neither has fought a combatant that was more technically skilled with a lightsaber than they were, and so how they would react is something of a mystery. As for overall experience, Jaina has clearly the upper hand, having fought and killed more opponents than she could probably count, starting as a child when she cut her way through the Shadow Academy, to dealing with the Yushan Fong as a teenager, dueling her brother in her early 30s, to facing off against the Lost Tribe in her prime. That being said, Mace can take the edge in greater number of skilled duelists, being able to add Count Dooku, General Grievous, Deepa Billaba, Sora Bulk, Car Vaster, Emperor Palpatine, and Asajj Ventress to his combat duels, along with adding an unknown number of his fellow Jedi he faced down in the sparring arena. At this point, it seems that both combatants are relatively equal in terms of their technical skill and their experience, and so we must move on to the final thing that could tip the scales: Vapad's superconducting loop. In Jaina's youth, and even during much of her time as a Jedi Knight, she was known as a hothead, who wore her feelings on her sleeves and was controlled by them in combat. However, by her prime, she had shed this mentality. Darth Caedus noted that when he stretched out in the Force to find Jaina's signature quick temper, that he could no longer sense it. And considering that Jaina was not hiding in the Force at the time, I believe that this was due to her emotional development. As for how she dealt in combat, I believe the beginning of the battle for the Jedi Temple gives an excellent description of Jaina when dropped in cold. Her strike team had just been ambushed, and as the last one out of the tube, Jaina emerged into a fierce melee of Jedi and Sith battling to the death. Despite noticing the bodies of her fellow Jedi littering the floor, she sprang into action, quickly cutting down multiple Sith with anything she could get a hold of. Despite the chaotic environment, Jaina thrived, noting that she had become an embodiment of chaos with an offensive stance that made her opponents think she was suicidal, when in reality it was a ploy to set them off balance. As for her mentality, despite her wildly aggressive fighting style, she remained cold and detached as a Jedi should be. She calmly took stock of the battlefield, aiming for the opponents that were of greatest threat first, while also denying them strategic objectives and favorable environments. This is unfortunate for Windu, as the superconducting loop of Vapad requires an opponent with both ill intent and to be very emotional in combat, opening themselves up to the currents of the Force, whether it be light or dark, and letting it flow through them. While Jaina was at one time this person, this no longer appears to be the case, and therefore it is likely that even if Mace was able to form the superconducting loop, piggybacking off of Jaina's presumed mastery of Form 1, that it would not be particularly effective, as Jaina would simply not be putting out the required amount of darkness, rage, and hatred to form a good superconducting loop. And because of this, Mace would not be receiving anywhere near the boost to his abilities that he had against Palpatine, and would be fighting Jaina at his baseline performance, which, while very impressive, was still somewhat comparable to Jaina. Therefore, due to all of these factors, I declare Mace Windu and Jaina Solo fell as equals in martial arts and lightsaber dueling, as I cannot see either combatant as being able to acquire a decisive edge over another. Mace Windu was one of the most powerful Jedi in the Order's history, considered second only to Yoda in terms of developed power for his era. As a trained Jedi Guardian, physical augmentation was his bread and butter, using the ability to achieve incredible feats of strength, speed, reflexes, and agility that any great master of the Force could accomplish. Windu was a master of telekinesis, showcasing his power on multiple occasions. During the Battle of Ryloth, he was capable of force-pushing an ATTE walker off a cliff and launching humanoids through the air with apparent ease. Mace was incredibly proficient in the application of force wave power, and used it to an incredible degree during the battles of Dantooine and Coruscant, blasting away and instantly destroying hundreds of battle droids away from him with a single kinetic blast. As for a more precise touch, Windu telekinetically removed the bolts of a super battle droid during the Battle of Dantooine, allowing the droid to fall to pieces. The Jedi Master also demonstrated an affinity for using darker telekinetic powers, such as Force Grip and Force Crush, the latter of which he used to severely injure General Grievous and give him the cough that would persist for the rest of his life. Mace was a capable telepath, employing the Jedi mind trick on several occasions, though it was nothing to write home about. Additionally, Mace had some ability with the healing arts, though this seemed to be limited to healing others and not himself. Aiding Windu throughout his life was also his Shatterpoint ability, a power he had always had a natural affinity for. It allowed him to see weak points in opponents, events, and everyday life. This power also allowed a Jedi to shatter otherwise unbreakable objects by channeling the Force into the places of the object that bound it together. Windu's Shatterpoint ability was not infallible, however. Against Palpatine, he incorrectly assumed that the Shatterpoint he sensed was in that of his opponent. In reality, it was that of Anakin Skywalker. Additionally, it was one thing to have the knowledge of the Shatterpoint. It was another to actually use it. If Windu was granted a Shatterpoint by his adversary, it did not necessarily grant him a victory, as a Shatterpoint could be anything. Against Palpatine, he realized the Shatterpoint of Sidious was that he trusted Skywalker. Such a Shatterpoint is not able to be used in combat normally, especially not on an even playing field, and as such the usefulness of this ability in single combat depends entirely on the opponent that Mace is faced with. At the end of the day, Mace Windu was a Jedi with a reputation of being one of the most powerful in his era, and unlike some others, this reputation was well earned. As the daughter of Leia Organa Solo and the granddaughter of the Chosen One, Jaina Solo possessed a powerful connection to the Force. As with any Jedi of her power level, Jaina was a master of physical augmentation, using it to boost her strength, speed, stamina, reflexes, and durability to superhuman levels. As a young girl, Jaina was shown being capable of producing light by rubbing air molecules together with the Force. Additionally, Jaina was capable of the Beast Control ability, along with basic Jedi mind tricks, control breath, purge toxins from her body, healing trances, and the Memory Rub ability. As a field agent, she would be taught to shut down by Ben Skywalker. The ability allowed one to cut themselves off from the Force whenever they chose, and when Jaina was in this state, she was unable to use the Force, she was completely undetectable by any Force user. While it is true that Luke Skywalker was able to advance this practice to the point that he could selectively choose who could sense him in the Force, along with being able to use the Force while in this state, I believe that this was more of a showing of Luke Skywalker's ridiculous power level, rather than any deficiency on Jaina's part. Moving on to combative abilities, Jaina was a master of telekinesis, using it to casually ragdoll humanoids along with reliably penetrating the barriers of opposing Force wielders. During her first duel with Darth Caedus, she sent a blast his way that was so powerful it sent Caedus not over the rows of seats, but through them. Jaina was also somewhat capable of Force lightning, discovering her aptitude with this power during her unstable mental state that resulted from watching her brother Anakin die, and believing her other brother Jason to be dead. While not depicted using the Force power since the New Jedi Order books series, given that multiple other members of the New Jedi Order are masters of the power, I find it likely that she could still draw on the power if necessary. Lastly, Jaina also had access to the Shatterpoint ability, using the Force to perceive the fault lines of the galaxy, and she has used it as both a tool of mobility on the battlefield by destroying doors and walls, along with practicing its usage against armored adversaries. As for its usage against opposing combatants, it is unknown if Jaina has advanced the practice that far yet. She was not, and likely never will be, featured in a single combat again after her final duel against Darth Caedus. All in all, Jaina Solo was nothing short of the perfect example of a powerful Jedi who was just beginning her career as a Jedi Master. While it is true that Windu has more grand-scale feats to his name, it is obvious that Jaina has more raw power due to her bloodline. However, because of Jaina's heavy combat focus, she has less developed skill on her side, allowing Mace to show comparable levels of power. Both have shown roughly equal proficiency in telepathy, the healing arts, and various esoteric abilities. Though Jaina does not have any two army-killing Force feats to her name, this is likely due to circumstance rather than inability, as the Yuuzhan Vong are immune to the Force. In the Swarm War, she was a commander and pilot. During the Second Galactic Civil War, she was a pilot and assassin, and the Lost Tribe was never gathered in one place with Jaina, and even if they were, pulling off a Force wave against an army of Force wielders would be something more in line with her uncle's abilities rather than Jaina's. Next, we have Shatterpoint. Both are capable of the physical aspect, so that cancels out. Next, we must assess the viability of the mental aspect. I will proceed with the assumption that Jaina has not mastered the mental aspect of Shatterpoint over the course of the events of Fate of the Jedi, as she is not mentioned as perceiving them in her depictions. As for Windu, on the one hand, Jaina's Shatterpoint could turn out to be something unattainable by Windu on an even playing field, like her love for Jag or her family, or it could be something exploitable in combat. Therefore, I will use some speculation informed by the only source of two Shatterpoint practitioners fighting one another, that being Jaina and Caedus. While Jaina did not have access to the mental aspect of Shatterpoint at that time, I find it unlikely that Caedus did not master it. Considering his plethora of rare and unusual abilities scavenged from all corners of the galaxy, using that theory, along with the fact that Caedus during his final duel had a motivation to end it as quickly as possible to save his former lover and daughter, it can be assumed that he would have used the ability against Jaina, and if he did so, it either failed or was a Shatterpoint that was unable to be utilized in combat. Therefore, while I admit that it is just speculation, I believe that if the two uses of Shatterpoint collided, that either the abilities would cancel out, or they would be unable to locate a Shatterpoint in another. Finally, we move on to other offensive and Force abilities. Windu would have no trouble deflecting Jaina's lightning if she did bring it out, though this is only the case if he had a lightsaber, and for this verdict, neither combatant is allowed to use anything other than Force abilities. And therefore, because Jaina has an offensive ability rather than telekinesis, she will get the edge in Force abilities. Mace Windu wielded the standard Jedi lightsaber with an amethyst-hued hurricane crystal that provides no special benefits other than familiarity with his own handiwork. He also wore the standard brown Jedi robes, having ditched his protective gauntlets by the end of the war. Jaina Solo wielded a standard Jedi lightsaber powered by a violet synthetic crystal that provided no extra benefits beyond familiarity with her own handiwork. She also wore either standard Jedi robes or her black tactical suit. In either case, neither provided special benefits. Due to there being virtually no difference in their equipment loadouts, there will be no edge given for weapons and equipment. And now, the verdict. For this fight, let's say it takes place in Darth Maul's training room in the Ly-Merge Power Building on Coruscant, with multiple loose objects of various sizes for the combatants to use. Additionally, let us assume that for the purpose of this fight, neither combatant recognizes the other, because one or both combatants recognizing each other would cause an uneven playing field. Additionally, neither combatant will have time to prepare for the battle. The fight will start with both combatants in full view of each other. As a final tally for this matchup, I see the victor win 6 times out of 10. This will be a description of one majority victory. Let us begin. Out of 10 times, I only see a fight between the two ending in the early fight one time, and it's Jaina's game all the way. Jaina decided to go all out with both her force abilities and her sable skills. It is possible, however unlikely, she could overwhelm Windu before he realized how much trouble he was in. As I said before, this is unlikely, as Windu is incredibly skilled in the terms of both force abilities and lightsaber combat, and so for him to lose such a scenario, he would have to severely underestimate opponent. And while Windu has made some questionable tactical decisions before, I doubt he would make such a mistake here. Therefore, the fight will move on to the mid-fight. Windu will have the edge in the mid-fight, as if a superconducting loop is going to be effective, this is where it will come into play. Jaina starts getting frustrated, or lets her emotions get the better of her, it is an instant loss, as Windu will be able to form the superconducting loop and be able to keep pace with Jaina indefinitely. However, if Jaina keeps her cool and behaves like the Jedi Master she is, Windu will be unable to use the loop effectively and will have to rely on another ability if he is to be victorious. Additionally, if Jaina has a shatter point that is applicable in combat, it is here that it will be found and exploited. In my opinion, I give one scenario to Windu for losing her cool, and an additional 2 scenarios to Windu for him being able to find the applicable shatter point and exploit it in the mid-fight. The late fight is where I believe this fight will end 6 times out of 10, and where the victor will likely be decided. At this stage of the fight, there will be no surprises to reveal. Jaina will have either done as I predict and adapted to Vapad, or died trying. Mace will have either done as I predicted and dealt with Jaina's onslaught, or died trying. If Jaina is going to break out her lightning, she would do so now, though it would be quickly deflected by Mace, and considering that Jaina is a very straightforward fighter, she would not use it as a distraction tool, which would be slightly effective. As for the wear and tear on each other, neither would have escaped scot-free, and both would likely be supporting lightsaber burns and at least one broken bone by this point in time. However, it is at this time that we will see that one combatant is tanking the damage better, that one of the two is taking the punishment and continuing as if they hadn't noticed, that 2 of their ribs had cracked, that they had a concussion that left them seeing stars, or God knows what else. This combatant could afford to do so because of a lifetime of warfare. This person could keep pace with the other while lasting longer and with force reserves much larger than their opponent. This combatant is Jaina Solo Fell, who would not win off the back of greater skill, but rather keeping her options open and sticking it out for the long run in a war of attrition. And while against almost any other combatant I would give Mace the edge in terms of endurance, he has shown nothing like Jaina's feat during the Battle of the Jedi Temple. And thus, I declare Jedi Master Jaina Solo Fell, granddaughter of the Chosen One and Sword of the Jedi, the victor. Before I explain my verdict, I will explain the inspiration for this matchup. It is a commonly accepted belief that Jaina is the Mace Windu of her era, from the purple lightsaber to the combat-heavy focus to Shatterpoint to being the one forced to face down the Sith Lord of her generation in single combat for a winner-take-all scenario. Additionally, it is also true that Jaina is massively underrated in a large portion of the Star Wars community, as aside from the brief heavy focus in the last 2 books of Legacy of the Force, she became something of a side character in favor of her brother, the original trio of Han, Leia, and Luke, along with their cousins Ben and niece Alana. Originally, this was to be corrected with a trilogy of books from Jaina's perspective, aptly named Sword of the Jedi. But alas, the Disney buyout occurred and the books were cancelled, though rumors of early and completed drafts persist. However, we get bits and pieces of what is likely to come in Fate of the Jedi, and due to the fact that even after scouring YouTube for versus videos on her to gain a better understanding of others' opinions, I could only find one example from EvanNova95 that was posted nearly 6 years ago. Therefore, I decided to rectify Jaina's lacking appearances and only had to find a suitable adversary. Discarding multiple Jedi Masters and Sith Lords, I decided that the most appropriate opponent for the Mace Windu of her era was, well, none other than Mace Windu himself. Now, on to the explanation. The first thing that came up in discussions with friends was how Windu fought equally with Palpatine, and that Jaina was in no way the equal of Palpatine. Yet, while I agree with the assessment that Jaina would not become Palpatine's equal in the Force for some years to come as she developed as a Jedi Master, I believe that she already outstripped Palpatine in terms of lightsaber combat, and in fact, the reason why Palpatine could fight on equal terms with the likes of Yoda and Windu is due to his ridiculous power in the Force, allowing him to amp his speed to ridiculous levels. And should his Force abilities be taken away, the flaws in his technique would actually become flaws instead of being so easily ignored as they are usually. I am aware that this does not change that Windu still fought equally with the greatest Sith Lord of all time, though I do have an answer for that. The Revenge of the Sith novelization makes it clear that the reason that Windu was able to achieve such a feat was due to the nature of Vapad. Palpatine was the perfect candidate to deploy the superconducting loop against, as he had close to unlimited power on the dark side, and when he let it loose, it was all elemental fury in the Force. Exactly the sort of opponent that Vapad was designed to combat. However, as previously stated, Jaina was no longer that person in combat, and had learned a Jedi serenity in keeping calm and collected, even while embodying chaos on a battlefield. Because of Jaina's lacking the necessary darkness, I find it extremely unlikely that Windu could deploy the loop against her with anywhere near the success he achieved against Palpatine, if at all. Next, many will argue that Windu's Shatterpoint is a trump card that even Jaina cannot overcome. However, I must stress that Shatterpoint is not an unbeatable trump card. Against Palpatine, Windu discovered that his Shatterpoint was that Palpatine trusted Anakin Skywalker, something that Windu obviously failed to exploit and would not come into play on an even playing field. I am willing to believe that Jaina could indeed have a Shatterpoint that is exploitable in combat, but when going over her duels against Kaitis and the Lost Tribe, I could not find anything that stood out as an obvious weak point or oversight. While Jaina could obviously be overcome by superior skill or superior power in the Force, this is true of all combatants, and as such I find it unlikely that Windu would need a Shatterpoint to figure that out. Once I deduced that this would be a slugging match, I had to figure out of which one of the two I would put my cards on to come out on top. This came down to comparing the two combatants' greatest feats of endurance, Mace Windu's being his time on Harun Kal, and Jaina in the battle for the Jedi Temple. While Windu's feats on his homeworld are incredible, even for a Jedi Master, Jaina's was superhuman. fighting inside a locked Jedi temple with 5,000 Sith and a Force entity for nearly a straight 48-hour period, even with help from 2 other legendary Jedi Masters, would be suicide for nearly any other Jedi in galactic history. But Jaina managed to survive with only a few broken bones and other minor injuries while pulling her own weight, and needed what is only implied to be a day or so to fully recover from this feat. Make no mistake, however, that a battle against Windu would be Jaina's greatest test, and a victory by her would be that by the skin of her teeth. I will also concede how incredibly close this matchup is, and I will fully admit that I could not guarantee a victory by Jaina. However, when placing the two together, I believe that Jaina will be the one to make the most of every opportunity placed before her, and when the chips are down, Jaina will be the one I put my money on. That being said, keep in mind this is all my opinion of a hypothetical matchup, and feel free to leave comments, criticisms, or suggestions for future matchups in the comments down below. I would like to thank you all for watching this 11th episode of the Versus series. There's only one left for Season 1. As a reminder, I will be taking suggestions for future Season 2 matchups, and these suggestions can be in the form of a specific matchup, or simply a character you would like me to use. Thanks to current fan input, I have 3 spots left for next season, so get those suggestions in quick. Thank you for watching again. Those of you that suggest a matchup that is featured will receive a shout out at the beginning of the video. And yes, if you suggest a matchup that has already been suggested, or I have already decided on, you will still receive credit. This is the Phoenix Exalt signing out, and may the Force be with you always.